Okay, I think we're almost there. Okay, we are now live. Just give folks a minute or two to log on.
Right.
Yes. And so have you always been in Lahore?
I was actually born and raised in Saudi Arabia, where my father used to work.
Oh, okay, I grew up in Qatar.
So not always. Oh, sorry, should have been done much earlier. But anyway, so I got married at a very early age when I wasn't even 16.
Oh,
and that is where I moved to Lahore because, that's a long story anyways. So my husband is my cousin, and since there was no college in Saudi Arabia, the easiest solution for me to continue my studies was to stay in Lahore, but not to be put up in a hostel, because that was not a good place for girls to be in those
right.
times. I'm talking about 210 years ago, so 2 centuries. So although I was dying to be to live in a hostel and have my own kind of fun life, but I was denied that, and instead but that's how it kind of worked out. I did study, I prepared for my 10th grade exam, and then I was married before the result came out, and then
Wow.
Everything else followed
From there. Yeah.
my degrees and my kids. Yes. Side by side.
Yeah, amazing. All right, we'll start this. Welcome, everyone. We will start and get into today's session. Thank you so much for joining us if you're back. And we'll maybe wait a minute or so. If you're already here, I would just like to warn you that we are having torrential rains here in Bombay. So if there is a lag, I will be back. So we're just keeping all our fingers and toes crossed that there isn't. And yeah, take this minute to maybe reach out to that friend who you think may enjoy today's session, or that family member, and we will get started.
सुबह जैसे आँख खोली थे, हमने सोचा कि चलो चाय वाय का बंदोबस्त करते हैं, देखते। जैसे आँख खोली, इधर भी मुर्दा और मक्खियाँ ऐसी उनके ऊपर कि जैसे कि लेयर ऑफ मक्खियाँ नहीं होती। जब तक 80 जिंदा तुसी भी जिंदा हो, जब 80 मर गए तो फिर उनकी जिम्मेवारी साड़ी नहीं।
Good evening, everybody, and welcome to day 5 of our 16-day series on the partition of 1947. Yesterday, we had an absolutely wonderful session with Dr. Radha Kapuria on classical music and the impact of partition on specifically Punjabi classical music. And we had a wonderful look at certain musicians, certain personalities, what happened to them at partition, how music changed, and who took the responsibility of the custodianship of South Asian classical music before a citizenship was perhaps unnaturally thrust upon it. As I mentioned to you 2 days ago, we started with the visual arts. We were doing a 3-day exploration into the arts and their relation to the subcontinent and partition at large. And so we started with the visual arts. And yesterday we went on to the musical arts. And today, for the first time, we are looking at an art form that is immovable. An art form that records history very definitively in a space and is difficult to erase. An art form that tells you of the influences on a city, on a town, just by its being there, although sometimes they are in such plain sight that they are ignored, and it is up to humans to rewrite the stories around them. There's a powerful notion there of obviously how we want to tell the story, and it is logical that across India, and at least North India and Pakistan, there are many shared spaces that may look and feel in fact quite similar even today. For example, the city of Lyalpur, which is today Faisalabad in Pakistan, was built in 1895, and it was one of the first planned cities, of Punjab. And it was planned based on the Union Jack with a central clock tower and 8 boulevards starting out from there. Many years later, in 1929, Connaught Place in Delhi was fashioned on the same design and completed in 1933. And today, I don't know in our common parlance how many people would think to compare those two cities to one another in the way that they're built and in the way that they look. They seem more far away perhaps than they actually are. Our guest today is far more qualified to talk about any of this than I am. So without further ado, please let me introduce Dr. Nadhra Khan, who is joining us from Lahore. Dr. Khan is an associate professor at the Lahore University of Management Sciences. Her primary area of research and interest is 19th century Sikh art and architectural ornament in the Punjab. Her work emphasizes the significance of the Sikh period as the end of indigenous art and architectural tradition before the annexation of the Punjab by the British in 1849, which changed the visual culture of the province forever. So without further ado, Dr. Nadhra, thank you so much for being with us this evening and welcome.
Thank you very much, Ragini. It's a pleasure to be here. I've been watching the earlier episodes, and I've learned so much about partition. Partition is something which is, I was born after that, but I'd heard stories of partition from my mother, who migrated from Ludhiana with her parents when she was 8 or 9 years old. Mm-hmm. And what she'd seen through her own very young eyes stayed with her for the rest of her life. Mm-hmm. She passed away 5 years ago, and in her later years, she just refused to talk about it. When we were younger, she used to tell us stories of what she'd seen. Right. She'd been on one of those trains that were, we all know what happened to people on both sides of the borders. Mm-hmm. But she was a witness to that, and her, those imprints on her young mind could never be erased. And then, I grew up listening to those stories, and I grew up with a very, how should I put it? With a certain worldview about myself and about the neighboring country. Mm-hmm. And then I got into architectural history, and I decided to work on a building that was, erected to commemorate a Sikh Maharaja, the Maharaja Ranjit Singh's Samadhi, or his funerary monument. Mm-hmm. And when I told my mother about it, she didn't like the idea because, that othering that had taken place at the time of partition had placed her in a position where her daughter taking up as a field of study something that she tried to shun out all her life. Right. Was not easy for her. Right. And as for myself, my initial visit to the Samadhi was, I'd never been there. I didn't know much about it. It had been standing right in front of the Lahore Fort. I'd been to the Lahore Fort a zillion times as a young kid who's, picnic spot with parents. Every time we used to visit Lahore. I wasn't in Lahore at that time. But I'd never noticed the Samadhi. I mean, I had noticed it, and I'd asked a couple of my cousins who were much older than me as to what it was, and they didn't know anything about it. Mm. And finally, one day during my PhD thesis, I was roaming around in the Lahore Fort trying to look for a topic that was fascinating on which I could write a research paper and bedazzle my professors and everything. And I came across an L-shaped structure, which is now known as At-Dara, which means 8 entrances. And this is a platform, which is a covered platform with 8 entrances, 5 on the longer side and 3 on the shorter side. It's, as I said, L-shaped. It was built by the Maharaja who used to hold his court in it. Because he stayed in the Lahore Fort throughout his 40 years rule of the Punjab, 1799 to 1839, till the day of his death on the 27th of June. So he had built it, refusing to hold his darbar in the Diwan-e-Aam or the Diwan-e-Khas that had been built by the Mughals.
Right.
So I didn't know anything about it. I just got on top of it with my camera and everything. And I started taking pictures, and a guide walked up to me and he said, do you have any idea what this is? And I said, please tell me. And he told me about it. And then he was the one who kind of directed my attention towards the funerary monument of the Maharaja that I'd actually walked past to enter the fort. And he said, have you seen his muddy? And now muddy was a word that was alien to me. I said, what exactly is that, sir? And he said, that is where his remains are. So I got off, tried to get into the Samadhi. I was stopped because, Pakistani national is not allowed. So I was told to go to the Evacuee Trust Property Board and get a permission. And I, pleaded my case. I'm a student. I need images to write my paper. Otherwise I'd fail and whatever, kind of up a story. And so these guys were really kind and they let me in, and I stood in the Samadhi and I looked around. And I've said that elsewhere as well, because this is exactly, I for as long as I live and as long as people are going to ask me as to how did I embark upon this and how did I get into this, this is my story. So I stood in the Samadhi and I looked around, all white marble, ainakari, and, red sandstone on the exterior surfaces. And what kind of started buzzing in my head was the narrative that I'd read in books, in history books, on books on Lahore. And these books had been talking about the Maharaja pillaging Mughal monuments and, sending everything off to Amritsar to the Golden Temple and B, doing whatever. And so part of me was kind of trying to put two and two together. So, all of this white marble is coming off Mughal monuments, and I'm going to be doing my PhD dissertation on this building, and what will I do? I had, at that time, I had no interest in studying it for its own sake.
Right.
I wanted to find out which Mughal monuments were, which part of this building was actually, attributable to. And so with those notions, I started off my journey of studying that building. And, during that, the course of my study, it not only brought me closer to the building and the builders and the people who'd played an important role in bringing it about, it also opened up avenues that I'd never ever thought existed. It brought me closer to Sikhs, and now I have absolutely dearest of dear friends who are Sikhs. I could never have imagined that was ever possible with stories that I'd heard while I was growing up.
Right.
So
what
one building
is to be that being in Lahore, academics there are the only people really who have the opportunity to dig into the details of this, with access to it if possible. And yet often that narrative is so closed off to many that they may never see it.
This is exactly what happened, because when I started my research, I tried to look for, earlier work on this, scholarly work on this, and there was none, because it had just been, dismissed as something. And this particular kind of statement is something that you find in every work on architectural history that was written before partition or even after partition. So what happened before partition, which is shortly after annexation, British officers, of course, took it upon their duty into educating the local people about their own heritage, of course. So that was a self-assigned duty, at least I think that this was a self-assigned duty of educating the local people about their own culture and about what was right and what was wrong and what was good and what was bad. These, opposite binaries was something that was working very effectively for them.
Right.
And then again, we know what they did to different communities, to different religious communities, and how the love and the egalitarian kind of sentiment that used to exist was severed.
Right.
So part of that was, I won't go into a lot of detail in that. Part of that was pitting Mughal architecture against Sikh architecture. Mughal architecture was the epitome of finesse, was tasteful. Sikh architecture was, quote unquote, a pale imitation of Mughal architecture, and was and about the Samadhi. Every book that you pick up published in the early 20s, late 19, you start with 1860 and you continue until now, is saying that Samadhi is the latest specimen of Sikh architecture, and it does not bear close inspection. It is what else do they say? This person, Thomas Henry Thornton, is the one who started this off, writing this small guidebook on Lahore, publishing it for the first time in 1860, and then continuing. The second print comes about in 1875 after John Lockwood Kipling started his career in Lahore as the principal of the Mayo School of Art. These art schools were set up in Lahore. Mayo School was the last one, the fourth one. And Kipling had already served at the JJ School in Bombay, and then he was beamed into Lahore to take up as the principal of the Mayo School. So Thornton's book was reprinted with some additions on Lahore as it is. And this contemporary, with the British buildings having been recently built, so an account of that was assigned to Kipling, who does Lahore as it is, and Thornton, appends or kind of makes a few changes. That's what he says in the preface that I'm using. So his chapter is called as Lahore as it was. So the historical content or the historical buildings, including the Mughal and the Sikh buildings, are, he's the expert authority, absolutely, on all of that, and he makes tiny little changes and just kind of uses that entire Lahore guidebook 1860 version to the 1860s.
If you could just drop in the anecdote that you shared when we last spoke about the definition of beauty and the Greek classical versus the South Asian conception of beauty and how that clashed, I suppose.
Yes, exactly. I mean, everything, when the British came in and, what had been happening at that time, if we look at the context, is the Industrial Revolution had taken place, machine-made versus man-made. That is the kind of debate that had already begun there. Whatever was beautiful used to be handmade. There was this nostalgia. And so the divide between art and craft was also playing around in those times. So all of these theories were brought into the subcontinent, into India. And what the Indians had been doing before the British came in was they were, their sense of beauty was very different from this divide between art and craft.
Right.
Their sense of beauty was to embellish, to beautify, to decorate, everything that would remind them of life or afterlife or the divine presence or themselves. So whether it was a mandir or a murti or a bowl, that would be used for drinking water, everything was embellished. And this was something that was very much a part of a common man's life.
Right. Okay.
And this was not something which could be rated as an elitist activity. Whatever people could afford, they would use to beautify their surroundings. But then, everything gets changed.
Right.
The local traditions were treated as decaying because, because, without understanding as to why this decay, termed by the British, was setting in, because there was no local market for objects that had been created and patronized by people who had money.
Right.
And that is why innovations were taking place and new materials would be used, and hereditary craftsmen would of course be wary of a lot of changes, but then there was a continuity with changing times. Of course, if we look at Akbari architecture or architectural embellishment, it is very different from Shah Jahani period, which is almost more than half a century later. And yet you find something which is connecting them together. And the same thing happens when we come down in Punjab to the Sikh period. We find that there is this continuity. Liturgical meanings may change for a religious building, but we have the same visual elements. We have a dome. It is now ribbed most of the time. We have the lotus flower that has already been used. Padma koshas were on Mughal domes. We have Padma koshas on Sikh domes as well. The construction methods may change. We don't get a lot of double domes. Now we get a kind of a Burji bungalow for that. But nevertheless, we have cusp arches. Sometimes we get elliptical arches, but then again, the arches and the columns and the pillars and with their bases and capitals, there isn't a drastic change. Because the craftsmen are, they're doing their craft, they're practicing their craft day in and day out. Yeah. And they're handing down whatever their forefathers had given them earlier. And these forefathers, of course, were, and then again, if we look at the caste system, the occupational caste system, there wasn't much room for mobility outside the caste system. So, very different to what students of art and architecture are doing these days. When we look at these hereditary craftsmen or the hereditary Memar or Tarkhan, that is how Ibbotson in his, Punjab castes classifies them. They were, eating, drinking, breathing, sleeping, whatever, 24/7, living with their ustads and kind of internalizing whatever was given to them. It wasn't 4 to 6 hours in a school and then back home and a total disruption that takes place. Yeah. So their quality of and their understanding of what local traditions meant was much nuanced than we can ever imagine them to be. Right. And that was again, what we find after annexation are no schools that were teaching or learning from these mysteries. Instead, we find a school at Roorkee, which is a civil engineering. Engineers from England are coming in, and going back to the art schools that were set up. So they were set up because the British education policies were, people who were making these policies were mourning the fact that art and architecture or artistic abilities or the aesthetic abilities of the local people, and they were called craftsmen, not artists, which is again something that we need to pay heed to, was decaying, was degenerating. And how could they be fixed? They could only be fixed by teachers coming in from England and teaching sons of those hereditary craftsmen on how to improve their crafts. Now, that doesn't make any sense to me, but this is how it was meant to be. So, that kind of brought about a shift. And as you said, that is what I focus on while I was working on the Samadhi. And, why I found the Samadhi so important was that it stands at this juncture after which everything changes. Right. This is the last state-funded building by the Lahore Darbar. Okay. And when we say state-funded, we kind of do understand that any project that is funded by the state or by such at such a level would invite and involve people of the highest caliber for whatever activity would be going on in that building. So this samadhi is beautiful from the outside, but it is more beautiful and more engaging and more captivating in the interior spaces because it has 48 wall paintings.
Wow.
And so it has on these wall paintings 24 at the base of the dome, the zone of transition. And these are iconic images of Hindu deities, the 10 gurus, and we also have the Maharaja, his son and grandson up there. So, a building that is erected in the honor of the Maharaja is also a part of that program of embellishment. And then on the lower level, which is the first floor level, we have another 24 paintings that are that are narratives from Mahabharata and Ramayana and Krishna Leela and folk tales, Dhruv Bhagat, and such beautiful mix.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, people now have lost the vocabulary to identify these characters.
I think you had an interesting anecdote in one of your other talks about students who had been asked to
restore these images.
Restore some of the paintings, yeah.
Some of the paintings after the faces had been gouged out. And they had no clue as to, what these characters were because they were studying how to draw in the English sense, life drawing and all of that.
Yeah.
And another thing that was kind of lost in all of this was that the artists who were painting these were fully conversant with what these characters were, what their backgrounds were, what their attributes must be. When they're painting Lord Shiva, how is he to be different from Lord Vishnu? And how is he to be different from another deity?
Right.
If you're not familiar with these attributes of each deity and each character, you cannot identify them because there's no recorded voice with them, right? Telling them, hey, and there's no text.
Yeah.
This is meant to be read with your eyes. The visual vocabulary has to have, a context in your own head. And these are cues for you to be reminded of the entire story.
Yeah. And depict it in certain ways.
Yes. And then, the rest goes in your head. This is what must have happened before that. And, people, of course, this was for an informed audience.
Right.
In pre-partition times or pre-annexation times, I would say. To me, partition actually happened at the time of annexation. It was, one form of partition from what was ours, from what, we as a nation used to take pride in, the style of architecture, the style of architectural embellishment, and everything else that would take place within an architectural space was, comes to an end after annexation. Because, new ideas were thrust upon people, and whether they liked it or not, some resisted, some had to come to terms with it.
Right.
But gradually, the earlier lessons were lost.
Over time.
Yes.
So I think we're quite lucky that you might have a few photos to show us who may not be able to visit for a long time, if ever.
I hope everyone does.
Yes.
I hope, and I hope this presentation and the images that I have in my PowerPoint, are a strong kind of convincing point for everyone to come and see these buildings for themselves, because they definitely are reminders of people who lived in this city before us, who left, as you said, immovable property. Whether they passed away or whether they migrated, these buildings, for as long as they stand, they are a testimony, a testament to their presence in this particular time and space and all that kind of is around that. So how do we go about it? I have quite a lot of images, and I thought I would just give a little bit of an introduction to Lahore.
Be wonderful.
And then, the Lahore Fort, what does it look like? what are the buildings around the Lahore fort, what does the Samadhi look like, which stands right in front of the fort, and which, so little people, so few people knew about it, and I didn't know about it at all.
Yeah.
Now I'm happy to report that I do. And then, a few other buildings that are to-go places in Lahore. So this is a virtual tour to Lahore.
Wonderful, wonderful.
And then, a few British period buildings and a little background if there is time. Otherwise, I'll be happy to to answer all questions that are, rolled my way during the question and answer session.
Lovely. Yes, so I think we can get started with our private virtual tour, which you're very kind to give us.
Great. Right. No, I'm opening the wrong. Just 1 second, please. I have a lot of things open. So
we have lots of engagement from the audience already, and many people commenting on the use of visual vocabulary and framing it that way, and lots of comments around that. And there's one question, perhaps just while you're starting up, and the question is, were the artisans given blueprints by the Lahore Darbar, or were they free to paint anything they liked inside the Samadhi of Maharaja Ranjit Singh?
So we don't really know as to what happened. We do, so what I've come to the conclusion, and what I've found through my research is we don't really have a detailed account as to, what was going on while the Samadhi was being built. But what we do gather through information, bits and pieces here and there, is that the Dogra Raja, Raja Dhyan Singh, who was Maharaja Ranjit Singh's minister, was actually the one who was, very closely involved in the sort of in deciding as to what goes on in the Samadhi.
Okay.
As far as the structure and the building was concerned, and procuring material for it was concerned, that was the duty of Fakir Nuruddin, who was again a very important minister.
Okay.
He was Fakir Azizuddin's brother. The two Muslim ministers in Lahore. The third one, Fakir Imamuddin, was in charge of the Gobindgarh fort. The third brother of these two brothers. So Fakir Nuruddin was the court physician for the Maharaja, and he was also assigned the duty of taking care of architectural, commissions that were sort of carried out by the Lahore Darbar. So what we find is that, Fakir Nuruddin is given the orders of erecting it, but the supervision probably was done by Raja Dhyan Singh, and that is why we find a lot of more than, although we do have the 10 Sikh gurus in the, as I said, on the top level at the base of the dome, but the majority of the images out of those 48 frescoes, 48 panels of these frescoes, it is only 10 that show the Sikh gurus. The rest are Vishnu's incarnations, other Hindu deities, and then the ground level is all Krishna Leela, Ramayana, and Mahabharata. Okay. So one kind of feels that this is what was this is how it must have come about. And the other thing is we also find standing in front of Maharaja Ranjit Singh is Raja Dhyan Singh himself. So, his, the other sons, other than Khadak Singh and Nonihal Singh, did not get a chance of being portrayed in the Samadhi. There was no space probably left for them. And so my understanding is that the paintings were finished, or at least the top level, were kind of already complete by the time, by 1843 is when Dhyan Singh dies. So, his portrait is already there. We don't have Sher Singh there. We don't have Dilip Singh there in the Samadhi. So who decided, who had to be painted, who had to be emitted? So that's always, the presence of a certain theme or a certain image also raises questions as to what was missed and was compromised to make room for that.
Yeah, absolutely. So just while you're starting up the presentation, I think you had also shared one other very interesting thought the other day, which was that, you know, when the British came in and they tried, as you mentioned, they tried to pit the communities against one another. They sort of built a false narrative around Maharaja Ranjit Singh, when in actuality, any emperor, sort of anywhere, who came to a space, whether, you know, Sikh, Hindu, Muslim, Christian, whatever, anywhere around the world, plays a part in, to some degree, appropriating what's around them and establishing themselves as the primary inhabitant of that space. So I think that was just something I wanted to share with everyone, but please.
Yes. I mean, so this is, again, as you know, when I said that I went to the Aktara and I looked at the Samadhi, and you know, I was standing in the interior on the ground floor of the Samadhi looking around, and everything that was kind of buzzing in my head was this actual narrative that I'd read, and I'd kind of, you know, by that time to some extent memorized, because, you know, this is something that keeps recurring. This was, you know, 1860, 1875. All gazetteers had Lahore as it was by Thomas Henry Thornton appended to their volumes, because you know, they acknowledged the fact that this was the most authentic account of the city of Lahore. Honestly, read Golding's Reminiscences of a Resident, H.R. Golding, which is, I think, 1924. Again, he acknowledges the fact that he could not find any better account of the city of Lahore than what Thornton had already done. And I haven't included that line in my, because I you know, to be honest, I didn't really know which way to steer this presentation to. I wanted everyone to, you know, have as much of Lahore as possible. And I thought if I get into that debate, that's going to, you know, make it towards a direction. But, you know, literally, this is what Thornton actually says about the Maharaja, that he's illiterate and he has no idea what architecture is. And then, you know, of course, accusing him of pillaging Mughal monuments and sending all the material to for embellishing Golden Temple and so on and so forth. And so, you know, starting off with Thornton, corroborated by so many other people, it is, again, the Indian authors, pre-partition. So I'm, you know, when I'm saying Indian authors, they include Hindus and Muslims and everyone else who is writing on architectural history of Lahore. And you know, among these, the most prominent are Sayyid Muhammad Latif, who writes in 1892, and before him, Kanhaiya Lal, Rai Bahadur Kanhaiya Lal, who was the executive engineer working in the buildings department in Lahore, who actually was given the task of strengthening the pillars in the interior of the Samadhi, because you know, the dome was too heavy and the pillars had started showing cracks. So he did a great job. He, I don't have an image of the interior of the Samadhi, but what he did was he erected columns in concrete right next to the marble ones, but then painted them, had them, you know, plastered and painted white. So from a distance, you know, people who don't know what actually has happened think that these are pairs of marble pillars. And actually these are not. So he also put iron clamps around the, you know, the necks of the capitals. So, you know, he did a wonderful job. But then when he writes about Sikh monuments and when he talks about the Maharaja, the narrative doesn't change. Yeah, it doesn't change. And unfortunately, the narrative continued to be so after the 1947 partition. When Pakistani architectural historians started writing about, you know, buildings of Lahore, monuments of Lahore, you know, the Samadhi and Sikh monuments were just completely dismissed as, you know, imitative. And so my understanding is that, you know, they were not viewing these buildings with fresh eyes. So I don't blame them in saying whatever they thought was the authentic narrative. They just, you know, hung on to it, and they thought, this is done by the British officer who had served at such a senior position, and not kind of, realizing for a minute that, Thornton was not schooled to, assess or evaluate or analyze Indian architecture.
Yeah.
He'd never studied it as a subject. He didn't, he was just using other notions,
Right.
other binaries that were working in so many other different places for political reasons, primarily for political reasons.
I was going to say, and he wasn't motivated by the architecture, he was motivated by the politics.
Yes.
Yeah.
So he was applying those notions and those sets of words to describe, what was in front of him.
Yeah.
So he was assigning one type of architecture, a place of respect, and the other, totally dismissing it. And another thing that I found during my study was that the gazetteer, 1881-82 gazetteer of Lahore, gives us a list of some monuments that were, escheat property. Nazul property is escheat property that kind of comes into the government's hands because it's not claimed by individuals.
Right.
So we have a a list of Mughal buildings, and then we have a list of Sikh buildings. So they're divided into categories, and the first category, of course, buildings that need to be preserved are Mughal buildings, and buildings that are in the second and third category that were not deemed worthy of being preserved were structures that were built during the Lahore Darbar's ascendancy. And that is why the general perception about this particular period and this architecture has been that it was not of any consequence.
Right.
And that is why there was no need to study it. And when you don't study something, when you don't engage with anything, whether it's a built structure or an object, it doesn't yield its story to you. It doesn't tell you about the people who built it. It doesn't connect you to people who inhabited these spaces, and the rituals and their voices engaging with each other, chanting, playing music. Everything goes on in a built space, right? Our lives are spent in these built spaces. Whether these are funerary monuments, there are certain rituals that the living perform for the dead in these spaces. And that also tells us about, gives us insight into their own beliefs and their own lives and their own, sort of systems that they have woven around them. But when you ignore a building, then it goes mute. And we still have a lot of buildings, other than the Sikh buildings. We have, fast forward to pre-partition times, we have a lot of buildings, and I have some in the PowerPoint, that are now standing mute because their owners and their builders left at the time of partition. And the vision that they had for these buildings is kind of lost because no one is going and trying to have a conversation with them, and trying to understand why were you built, and what exactly were the functions that you were meant to play in a particular person's life. And once you start doing that, any building would come to life. It would tell you its own story, and so Deborah Cherry actually uses, and I, kind of borrow her term, lives and afterlives of buildings are equally important to be studied as we study human beings who build these spaces, because they have a very direct and unbreakable connection with these people. So this is, at the top, I have Hazrat Mia Mir's tomb. This is Ranjit Singh Samadhi in the middle. And this is the General Post Office, the V-shaped building. And we will talk about it in a bit when I have, because I have another image for this as well, the front elevation. So Lahore. Lahore is a city, whose origins are kind of shrouded in mystery. A lot of people have attempted to kind of find out when was it built, who built it, and so on and so forth. Generally, historians believe that when Alexander passed by this area, he did not come across Lahore. So probably, Lahore wasn't there at that time. But anyways, what we do find is our stories about Lahore having been founded by Shri Ram and Sita's son Lo. And we have a Loka Mandir in the Lahore fort, and I have an image for that. But for whatever reasons, and then the neighboring smaller sort of city, Kusur, is believed to have been founded by his brother Kus. So Lo and Kus were the founders of Lahore and Kusur.
Wow.
So this is the general narrative. This is the general kind of understanding about about the origin of these two cities, which goes back millennia, in prehistoric times. So Lahore has been celebrated for political reasons, because this was an entry into India. Was the gateway into getting into central India, and all invaders, everyone who wanted to come and visit India for not for good purposes, passed through Lahore. Nadir Shah, Ahmad Shah Abdali, and earlier, of course, Babur comes in, and before him several others, Ghaznavi, Mahmud Ghaznavi, and Ghori. But what we do find is that, besides political reasons for being celebrated by the Mughals as Darus Sultanate, this is how they kind of refer to Lahore in their court chronicles, the realm of sovereignty. It was something that also evoked, sentimental associations as well. Dara Shikoh was a great favorite at Lahore, and Dara Shikoh was Shah Jahan's son, who was the governor of Lahore for some time. But this is, something that Dara said about Lahore, and I wanted to share it with my audience here. Bood Abad Daim Shahar Lahore, and this is Persian. My Persian is very elementary, although I wish I was better in it. But let me just recite it for you. It gives me great pleasure. Bood Abad Daim Shahar Lahore, Waba Wakahat Zabaka Dur Darat. And the translation, of course, is right in front of you. May the city of Lahore prosper till eternity, and may epidemic and famine stay far away from it. And we also have, Masood Saad Salman, who was 15th century poet, who was, a resident of Lahore. And when he was imprisoned far away from Lahore, he lamented and wrote about Lahore and begged to God in his prayers to be brought back to Lahore. So that, whether it's topophilia or Habsiya, prison poetry, whatever, Lahore kind of features very prominently in Masood Saad Salman's poetry. So this is how Lahore was kind of understood. Akbar stayed in Lahore for almost 14 years because he wanted to quell disturbances in Kabul by his half brother and the Uzbeks and so on and so forth. And that is where Lahore kind of comes into prominence. And so a lot of economic activity with the emperor's residence in Lahore brought about a lot of architectural activities. But unfortunately, we don't have a lot that can easily be datable to Akbar's period. But what we do have, and I have a lot of images that are, clearly datable to Jahangir's period, Akbar's son, and then Shah Jahan, who was Jahangir's son, so on and so forth, and something about with Aurangzeb. I hope there is time for all of that. I go over time, just tell me to stop and I'll stop.
So we technically have 10 minutes. We've been going an hour every night. So if it is okay with everybody watching, I think we will extend by 15 minutes this evening because I think we're all just really fascinated by everything that you have to say. So we'll maybe keep we'll give another 15 minutes after the hour.
Wow, thank you so much. Thank you so much. I will try to go slow and not, kind of try,
I hate to rush you.
out everything, in the same breath. So this kind of gives you a little, a little understanding of what the walled city of Lahore means. So this is, the way that my cursor is moving is the boundary wall of that used to be around Lahore, and this boundary wall, of course, had gates. So Lahore used to have 13 gates. And these gates were, of course, facing the places or the cities for whom they were. So the Kashmiri gate would actually be at a location in a position that faced Kashmir.
Right.
So this is the northern side. So Kashmiri gate, and then we had the Khizri gate. And this was so another thing is that this is the fort, which is situated, which was now, there is, it is kind of covered up on all four sides because the urban sprawl is uncontrollable. But up till the Sikh times, this is what it looked like. There was this Maidan Parade, or an empty piece of land, which was actually the bank of the river Ravi, because Ravi used to flow by this side, by the northern side of the fort, and the city was at the back end, towards the southern side.
Okay.
So since water used to flow by this side, this particular gate was used to be called the Khizri Darwaza. Khizr, the prophet, the Muslim, Islamic, not Muslim, but Islamic sort of prophet, who lives for eternity, who treads upon water and, guides people who get lost. So that it was, that is why it was named after Khizr. But during the Sikh period, the Maharaja had, and, I haven't really come across in a historical account of this, but this was generally known as the Sheramala Gate. And the explanation for this title is that, there used to be two caged lions flanking the gate.
Okay.
And this is Yaki Gate towards the eastern side, again, a martyr saint Zaki. This is the Delhi Gate, faces Delhi. Akbari Gate is something that was, put in place by Akbar. Moti Gate is probably, again, a debate about, this was probably named after Moti Ram, a close courtier, an associate of Akbar's, which later kind of turns into Mochi, which means a cobbler.
Right.
And then Shah Alam is, Emperor Shah Alam, Aurangzeb's son. This is again a debate about whether it's Lohari or Lahori. The blacksmith community probably used to live here, and that is why it wasn't. Or the other story is that actual Lahore was outside these gates, and so this faced the old Lahore, which was around Mazang, which used to be a kind of a small village outside the borders of this. And this is the Mori Gate, which was actually a sewage, but a smaller one. But this is the Bhattis or the Bhattis. This is known as the Bhatti Gate, the Bhatti community. Right. And Taksali Gate is so there used to be a mint here, Taksal.
Okay.
So this faced that, or there was a mint inside, must have been inside, for safety and security purposes.
Right.
And so this is now the Lahore Fort. And what we have here is the Badshahi Mosque. And in between the fort, and this is the gateway that was added to the fort by Aurangzeb, the Alamgiri Darwaza, is this square piece of land that you have in front of you is something that was laid out as a garden by Maharaja Ranjit Singh, which is known as the Huzuri Bagh. And in the center of the Huzuri Bagh stands the white marble Baradari. Okay. So, there are several buildings within, one I mentioned as the Athdara, which is around this area. This is the Sheesh Mahal apartment, the Shah Burj. This is the Shah Burj Gate. I have images of that, which is also known as the Hathi Gate or the Elephant Gate, because it has elephant stairs, stairs meant for elephants to tread upon, not for human beings.
Oh, wow.
Because the women of the harem would be riding a hoda on top of the elephant. And so the elephant would take them in the inner spaces of the fort and not ask them to disembark at the outer gate. So, the seclusion and the harem apartments and all of that. And so they were brought to the Musamman Burj or the Saman Burj, which is a term that is given to the Shah Burj. This is the term that we find in Mughal chronicles, but during the Sikh period, it started to be called Musamman instead of Shah Burj. And Musamman means an octagon. So this is octagonal. Right. So, and Saman again means is a flower. I think it's, I don't remember. Chambeli, or probably, I don't know what it's kind of, I'm forgetting the English name for this. So, so the fort itself, as the rest of the city is, a kind of a palimpsest. It's side by side, one building datable to one particular period in a totally different idiom, using a different material, used for different purposes, and then, readapted, adaptive uses, appropriated for other purposes. But that is how it is. One has to look at all of these layers and admire them and get their stories from them,
Right.
what happened to you in a particular lifetime.
Yeah.
So this is an image now, that was a sketch.
Yeah.
And this image again gives us a clear understanding of this is the Badshai Mosque. And this is the gateway to the Badshai Mosque. This is the Hazuri Bagh that I was just talking about. This is the Baradari that stands in the center. This is the Alamgiri Gate, which was actually, the fort's walls must have been straight here. But once Aurangzeb commissioned the Badshai Mosque, a new gateway had to be put up facing the Qibla, because the orientation towards the mosque had to be done. So that is why we don't find it in straight lines, and that is why we have this curve in the boundary wall of the Lahore fort. I do have all other images, but let me just point out and then move down to the Sikh period buildings right in front of it. This is the picture wall of the Lahore fort, and this is the Hathi Pav that I was just talking about. You enter through this and you turn left, and the elephant would take you to this particular this space. And from there you disembark and get into the Saman Burj or the Shah Burj. Right in front of the Lahore fort is the Dera Sahab complex. And this, where my cursor is moving, the entire space is the Dera Sahab complex. What we have, these domical structures that in white that you see, the taller one is Maharaja's Samadhi. The smaller two domes at its back are Nonihal Singh and Khadak Singh's Samadhis. And right in front to the left is, this is also a small gilded dome. And this is a funerary monument that the Maharaja himself built in honor of the fifth Sikh Guru, Guru Arjan Dev. Okay. And later there was a Gurdwara that was built right next to it. So now all of this is kind of enclosed in this Dera Sahab complex, and access to this is, denied to Pakistani nationals unless and until they have special permission from the Iraqi Trust Property Board. And I was luckily allowed in. Many years ago. That was 2004, I guess. Yes. Wow. This painting kind of, tells us about the river Ravi and the bed, the Maidan Parade. This writing here says Maidan Parade. This is the fort's wall. This is Badshai Mosque. This is the Samadhi. and this is the Saman Burj.
Okay.
And these are paintings that were kind of introduced during the British period. These kind of cityscapes, come landscapes, panoramic views of cities.
Right.
This is Lok Mandir, at right next to the Alamgiri gate if you get in, which is at a much lower level than the rest of the fort's floor has risen up. The architectural sort of style kind of tells us that this must have been renovated or worked upon during the 19th century. So it doesn't, the structure, we don't know what it must have looked like before it was renovated during probably the 19th century.
Right.
But definitely this, this spot is referred to as Lok Mandir.
Okay.
So the founder of the city, probably, this is commemorating. And this is the gateway of the Dera Sahib complex.
Okay.
This was kind of, is now replaced with a much grander building. But this is the Gurdwara that was added to the Shahidi Asthan in late 19th century. This is the dome of the Shahidi Asthan that was commissioned by the Maharaja himself. Okay. And this is his Samadhi.
Wow.
And this is the Baradari. The Baradari used to have, so this Baradari has, 2 basements. So it was 4-floored, 2 underground, subterranean, and 2 on top. The top one fell down during the British period around 1932 or so. And so the Archaeological Survey of India. Sorry?
Was there some sort of an attack, or just structurally it fell down?
Due to heavy rain, that is what is recorded in the Archaeological Survey of India report. And also, the person who's recording this and also states that we do not have funds to repair it. Hence, the debris has been removed inside the Lahore port. And what happens to all of that white marble that had turned into debris? There are no accounts of that. So quickly, we have to jump over to Mughal period buildings. But I would really urge my audience to, keep making or sort of taking cues from these buildings and try and weave a kind of a link as to what do you find which is comparable among all of these buildings, and how many changes do you see? Right. And then when we actually come to a different visual vocabulary, then we can, exchange notes on what happens. So this is Kamran ki Baradari, and Kamran was Humayun's brother, half brother. And so he was the first Mughal prince who actually, chose to stay in Lahore and build this Baradari. So what now stands, this is a close-up, this stands on Ravi. So it has actually now stands on a kind of an island, and one has to approach it through a boat. But, it has been renovated 1,000,000 times. So what we see on the right side of the picture is not, the architectural style that can be datable to, to Babur's time or Humayun's time. These are results of endless undocumented renovations and restorations. Right. But anyways, the next important building that we find in Lahore, other than the fort, during Jahangir's period, is this Maryam Zamani Mosque that was built by his mother, Maryam Zamani, who's, this is her title. She was a Rajput princess. So she commissioned this mosque and beautifully embellished it. The interior is all fresco painting, and it is breathtakingly beautiful. And, for fear of time, I did not include too many pictures. This is Anarkali's tomb, and this is again attributed to Jahangir. And we are all kind of familiar with Anarkali having been buried alive while she was not even asked to lie down. She was probably just standing in a wall built around it, which is a horrendous way of, but again, this is a play that was written by Imtiaz Ali Taj in early 20th century. We don't find any of these stories in Mughal chronicles. Probably this is a funerary monument. They're dedicated to one of Jahangir's wives, because what we do have is a cenotaph in the interior, which was, so this particular building, and talking about appropriation and sort of changing the character of a monument by the next ruling power, this is a great example of that. So Anarkali's tomb was turned into a church by the British.
Wow.
And yes, so the finial of the tomb used to have a cross. And they made changes. They took off the cenotaph from the center of the tomb, and anyone who's been to a Mughal tomb, let's say Humayun's tomb in Delhi, would know that there would be a kind of a circumambulatory around. The cenotaph would be in the center, and there wouldn't be anything else around it. You just walk around it, because the Mughals had this practice of circumambulating the grave out of respect for the dead. So what the British did was they, in order to create this nave-like space in the interior, which was actually an octagonal building, they kind of, took out the flooring, changed it, and the nave-like shape still exists. The cenotaph was locked down in one of the, and this is what Sayyid Muhammad Latif, writing in 1892, records, that the cenotaph is locked in one of the corner turrets, one of the rooms in the corner turrets. And because this, functioned as the church for many times until a cathedral was built. And then what happened, the British turned it into an archives office. And strangely, it still serves as the archives office.
Oh, wow.
So we are holding on to the colonial legacy to a large extent. So this is, so the cenotaph is very interesting because, it's in white marble. It has carved 99 names of God, of Allah on the top side, but on one of the sides is a verse, which says, it is signed off by Majnu Salim Akbar. Majnu means mad in love.
Right.
So, it's in Persian, and if we translate it, it kind of, a very free translation would be that if I could hold your face one more time in my hands, I would eternally be thankful to God.
How beautiful.
So the name of the deceased is not given.
Okay.
The patron, of course, signs off with his name.
Yeah.
And the story of Anarkali is created around it.
Right.
And another thing that is attributed to Jahangir, not in Lahore but very close to Lahore, in Sheikhupura, which was his hunting grounds, is where he erected a monument, and this is the one, a Hiran Minar. His pet deer or antelope, accidentally died with his own bullet. We don't know, probably, but somehow or the other, and he commemorated his death by erecting a minar, and then this artificial body of water and a baradari in the center.
So we actually have a question about the baradari that came up. Someone asked, can you speak about the structural significance and purpose of the baradari structures, and who first designed these? Because you see them across many cities in both India and Pakistan.
Of course, I mean, baradaris are, it is difficult, really difficult to actually, find out as to where and when were they created and by whom. Baradari means, bara means 12.
Gee.
And dar means in Persian entrance.
Okay.
So baradari means that, dari is kind of is a kind of, how should I say it? Is something that has come about in terms of, easy to kind of refer to, but generally it would be baradar. So any building with baradar would be referred to as baradari, and then this becomes a generic kind of a reference to a building that has several entrances. And so this type of a pavilion was erected to probably catch the monsoon breeze, because it would be open and it would be airy. And this type of a building would generally be erected in the center of a garden, as a recreational
Gazebo sorts.
yes, as a building for recreation, open on all on all sides, allowing a free flow of air in the, and then sometimes what we find is that these baradaris actually have more than 12 entrances.
Right.
Sometimes they're not square. So a proper baradari would be square, have 3 entrances on each side, and all around there would be 12. Rectangular baradaris also exist. Baradaris with more than 12, less than 12 entrances also exist. But they, as a generic name, they're referred to as baradaris.
Five minutes to 9.
Oh my God. So this is Jahangir's tomb. This is Asif Khan, Noor Jahan's tomb. Again, Shadara, very close to the Hiran Minar. And this, now we are back into the Lahore fort, and this is the Shah Burj, or the Hathi Pav Gate. This is the picture wall, and this is again fascinating because these are narratives that say a lot about what the worldview of these emperors was. So half of this is attributed to Shah Jahan, the other one is datable to Jahangiri period, who commenced it in the first place, and then the rest of this was completed by Shah Jahan. And how their their ideas about themselves and the world that they're ruling are slightly different from each other, from the father and the son, their own different personalities. This is again the rest of it. This is Wazir Khan Mosque in Lahore, built during Shah Jahan's period by Hakim Ilmuddin Ansari, who was the court physician, governor of Lahore as well. Shalimar Gardens, again Shah Jahani period. And this is the Alamgiri Gate that I was talking about, right in front of the Badshai Mosque, built by Aurangzeb Alamgir. And the picture is taken from the Hazuri Bagh Baradari. So this white marble structure, the cusped arches, and this pinnacle and the flower at the pinnacle is something, these acanthus or lotus-like leaves or flower petals at the capital, at the base, this colorless base is something that we will find not only in Mughal architecture, but throughout in Rajput architecture, in
very similar
architecture, very similar.
Very similar.
And this is Badshai Mosque, anyone who's seen the Jamia Masjid Delhi would, be able to connect. The Jamia Masjid, the domes have segments which are inlaid in black stone. They're not actually segmented, but these don't have that. Otherwise, there are strong similarities, red sandstone. This is Mia Mir's tomb. That kind of brings in Dara Shikoh, who was a great favorite of the people of Lahore, who was really invested in the betterment of Lahore, and who was a disciple of Hazrat Mia Mir. And Hazrat Mia Mir, of course, is the one who laid the foundation stone for the Golden Temple in Amritsar, who was a great friend of Guru Arjan Dev. So, these are connections that that must be forged, that must be resurrected, that must be revised and revisited, because these have long been forgotten. But these buildings again are very much there. They have all of these stories to tell. This is the Suneri Masjid, and the story about the Suneri Masjid is again that this was in the control of some Akalis during the Maharaja's time, who would not allow the azan to be called out. So the Muslims kind of complained to the Maharaja, and the Akalis said, we're not going to do that because that's a lot of noise and we cannot deal with it. And so the anecdote about this, in reply to this, is that the Maharaja said, what do you think is a call for prayer? And the Kali said, they kind of, it reminds people that this is the time for prayer. And so the Maharaja said, all right, I do not allow, if you don't want people the Muazzin to call out for prayers, it is your duty then to knock at every Muslim door and tell them, hey, this is time for, to say the prayer. And they did it for probably 4 days or a week or 10 days. And then they came back and they said, we can't do it, let them. The tactful way of the Maharaja dealing with different, religious communities, and how to, kind of quickly now, this is the Sheesh Mahal. The Ainakari is, again, Sheesh Mahal was by Shah Jahan. What we now have, since the Maharaja resided in these apartments throughout the 40 years, we have in these sunken niches, beautiful paintings, again, all Sikh themes, Krishna Laila and Vishnu and Radha and Draupadi and, all of that. Again, characters that are lost to the general public. They have no idea what is painted in these. And the Ainakari is also Sikh period. The white marble structure is Shah Jahani. This is a small temple before you enter the Saman Burj, again, by Ranjit Singh within the Lahore Fort. So here you see the dome of the temple. And then, in the background, you have the domes of the Badshai Mosque, side by side, the small domical structures of the minarets. This is Naunihal Singh's Haveli in Lahore, not too far away from the Lahore Fort. And now we have the British Raj, we have the railway line cutting through the city. Now we have names of colonies like Donaldtown and, so Anarkali's tomb is turned into Punjab government office, right? So, this is these are, I cannot go fast forward enough to, kind of highlight the changes that the city then started witnessing. The railway station, look at the vocabulary now. And this is, now look at what is confronting people of Lahore in those times. Now, the British authorities are asserting their own identity, their own presence in very different words. These are semi-neo-Gothic styles that are kind of, let me just move forward. Look at this, neoclassical. This is the Lawrence and Montgomery halls that were, again, right in the center of the newer part of the city, Mall Road, which connected to the governor's house. And so, when I talk to my students, I ask them, imagine yourself to be a resident of Lahore. Imagine yourself to have been, accustomed to looking at what we just saw, Mughal monuments or Sikh monuments, the continuity of a certain, material culture in front of you. And then you have this, asserting their own identity, asserting their own supremacy, dismissing everything that was local and that had, deep roots in the tradition. And with this, what we find in later architecture, and this is GPO, and this is in a shape of a V, celebrating Queen Victoria's Golden Jubilee.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
So this is the front elevation of that, which would be this part. But this is how it was laid out, and there are so many other buildings that are very similar. And look at the crowns around these cupolas.
Yeah. Your line that you said in the beginning about, buildings would only give you their stories if you engage with them really rings true. Really rings true with this.
Exactly. And, so the pediment had to be there.
Yeah.
Asserting its identity. It's very classical Greek, superior identity as compared to whatever the locals were capable of. Neo-Gothic, again, this is Government College. These everything that kind of reminds you of a Gothic church architecture. This is the Lahore High Court. Now, this is very interesting. Pitched roof gables. Lahoris must never have seen any of this. But interestingly, this is again a kind of a mix of local activities as well. And this is the Lahore Museum. I'm going to end. This is Bradley Hall then, which was built much later, early 20th century by, the foundation stone was laid by someone who'd actually, what was his name? I noted, Surendranath Banerjee in 1900, October 30th. And this Bradley Hall, Charles Bradley, I don't know how many people will be familiar with, but, free thinker, a great supporter of India's movement for independence. He never visited Lahore, but when activists wanted to erect a building that was a shared space for holding rallies or any cultural activities as well, not only political. Right. Dramas, dances, mushairas and musical evenings. They named it after Charles Bradley. Okay. And this is your great-grandfather's Baba Dinga Singh building. And over to you to tell us, what do you think of this building? You just told me that this was a commercial plaza, but also a residential building till 1947. It still stands there. The name is still there. People know of it as Baba Dinga Singh building, built by Rai Bahadur Dinga Singh in 1927. So all we need is to kind of, go back and one just last slide is I want to leave my audience with just food for thought. Is what is partition or wand? If we use the Punjabi term, division, these divisive policies, what were these? So othering is an ideological process that isolates groups that are seen as different from the norm of the colonizer. But becoming an another is a transformation or a radical self-individualization that has led us to where we are today. Yeah. We must revisit all of these notions, and we must try and read each other as human beings and everything that reminds us of each other in fond, these fond memories should actually be very close to our hearts. And I would end here because I've gone way over time.
Wow, what a really beautiful thought to end on. I wish I could reach out through our various screens and give you a hug. I just feel so touched after your talk. It was so beautiful. Thank you so much.
I feel the warmth. Thank you, Ragini. Thank you.
And I can see there are. I think I mentioned obviously Lahore is our ancestral city, and so there are many family members who have tuned in today to view Lahore through your pictures, and all are saying that this has just been a beautiful revisit, and everybody would want to come back to see.
I would welcome everyone with open arms. It's their city; they must come back. Everyone should.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Dr. Khan. This has been very, very special. Thank you.
It is a pleasure, really.
Thank you, everybody, for joining us. We have gone over time, but I think you will agree with me that it was 150% well worth it, and we've learned so much and we have seen so much. And Dr. Khan is really a pioneer in the work that she's doing. As she mentioned, she was unable to find much scholarly work in her field before she started her research, and so I think we must thank her for opening these doors for us and for giving us this worldview that on either side of the border, perhaps we are almost at risk of, or even have lost in some cases. And so I think we have to be very thankful to these historians for doing the work for us and bringing this to us to learn. We'll come back tomorrow night. Please join us. We will be joined by Pakistani cook and writer Sumayya Usmani, who will be taking us on another journey of Pakistan, looking at Pakistani regional foods as they stand today. With that, good night.
Good night. Thank you very much.
Good night.